Hello everyone, we're here for a brand new episode of our Maya and Maya podcast from FindingSustainia. And we are very happy and a little challenged to have someone with us in the room. He's a great thinker and we're very inspired by many of his written pieces. And when we dared to ask him to have an conversation with us, we were also inspired by this. So we thought this definitely needs to be an FindingSustainia episode. And his name is Joss Tantram. And Shanta will shortly share the story. But what we really like about him is that he is for long in the sustainability field. So he can tell us a lot from times where we just started to think sustainably. And we already learned a lot from him. And he worked for the WWF. I'm always confused with the German and English. But there they already worked on the gathering of changemakers. And this was also something inspiring for us to hear. And he's now working in consultation projects and decided that this is not enough, that thinking and writing still needs to be added to the picture. We believe that this is a great mix, and we're happy to have you here, Joss.
Thank you so much,
Yes,
Anna.
welcome.
Shanta. So pleased and honoured to have the chance to have a chat with you today.
Yeah, and now Shanta, tell our audience how we got to know Joss in the first place.
How I meet you, Joss. And I stumbled upon his report. It's a WBSCD. I'm also not very good with these abbreviations. Report on uncertainty, and I really liked it. And then I wrote a Medium article on, including some things where I felt there could be some room for improvement or some ways to further think this thought on uncertainty. I think I had around 3 readers at that point, and then I suddenly got a LinkedIn message by Joss, who is one of the leading authors, who wanted to discuss this. And it took us quite a while to finally manage a moment. And actually, it also made me reflect, okay, so I was just writing about this report that I liked, but forgetting that there are human beings behind that report. And so I was kind of also questioning whether maybe I had offended you or something. But what happened is, and that's actually yesterday, your ears must have been ringing, Joss, because we were also talking about our meeting in a podcast with Michael Brown, and something that really first of all, what gave us a lot of hope is that you said that sustainability comes in these ebbs and flows, and right now we are in a bit of an ebb phase. But we can also expect a flow. And I mean, we've seen a bit of the ebb, but then we saw a lot of flow, and I think that made us think that sustainability is the thing. And now we're kind of back in an ebb, and it's been a little tough. And the other thing which I really like is, sometimes you have these meetings with people and they're really inspiring, but then you don't really take it further. But for instance, having this podcast is already a way of collaboration, a way to give this a bit of a result, something to kind of carry it further and also to create a relationship. It's also something, when I woke up this morning, I was looking forward to, okay, I've been talking a bit too much. Maybe Anna, you have prepared a few questions as well. I could see you were very excited about them.
Maybe we can start with talking about the report you just talked about, because I think for our audience, it's a report which is quite important. We know that Joss himself already knew that there are things which were not covered. And maybe you can sum it up a little, Joss. What was the report about, and what is missing?
Okay, that's fantastic. Yes, of course. So just to be clear, so this is a report that we wrote as a project or a consultancy project for the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, WBCSD. And just as a little bit of background, I was a part-time director of their Redefining Value program from 2009. And the work that WBCSD does, it's a business-led, CEO-led NGO that seeks to understand, interpret, navigate and support companies in transforming and transitioning their businesses. The report itself is it's basically on a topic in one of the areas that they support businesses in, disclosure. So how do companies understand what they should report, how they should report, to what extent they should report it, how they navigate uncertainties and challenges. And one of the themes the WBCSD members had highlighted was that there was a number of questions that related to the topic of uncertainty. And that can be uncertainty in terms of what's happening with disclosure regulations and, how certain are they? What is their scope? Is the scope changing, etc.? How do they balance where they may be operating in different territories? How do they understand how to produce information which is meaningful and aligned with different disclosure regulations? But then there's also the actual content of disclosure, what they should disclose, how they should disclose it, how do they deal with things that are by their nature uncertain in terms of sustainability issues like resource challenges and uncertainty, regulatory uncertainty, cost uncertainty, and all of these sorts of things. And this really relates to the challenge that reporting and accounts requires is a level of certainty in disclosure that allows a user of that disclosure to make decisions on that information. And that is fairly well travelled as a pathway for financial information, with not saying it's perfect, but it's much more established. And obviously for sustainability information, or what's sometimes called non-financial information, the uncertainties are greater. The topics are more unpredictable. The recognition of whether they are meaningful for the future performance of a company is more indefinite. And so companies had a whole range of different uncertainties that they were trying to deal with. And essentially what the project was supporting WBCSD in talking to practitioners within companies, talking to standard setters and other experts, and trying to produce information and guidance which said what are the types of uncertainties that companies have and how might they start to navigate those. It's not the end of the story, but it's a sort of contribution towards travel on a journey, if that makes sense.
It does. What would you say when we somehow, Anta and I came out of our last meeting and we thought you're somehow an expert of uncertainty. You wrote about it and you also have your thoughts about it, and you have all this experience in all these organizations, but also in times where sustainability was seen as and was not seen as. So you handled uncertainty as a person. Maybe we started right with the topic, and now we also want to get to know you as a person. So how did you become the Mr. Uncertainty?
I don't know. I think Mr. Uncertainty, I'd be slightly worried if that was my official title. Well, I think to step back, how did I become? Obviously, you sort of said I've been involved in sustainability. I've been involved in sustainability, I think, when I had my first proper job in 1995, but sort of started working in consulting. At the time, it was natural environment consulting, and with my own business in 1993. So I've been involved in sustainability for quite a long time. I have more hair, and it was less grey when I started. And I think one of the challenges that all sustainability practitioners have, regardless of how long they've been in the profession, is that they are always essentially representing a set of issues and challenges that they believe are really fundamentally important for society in general, and then more specifically businesses, policy, accounting, economics, to pay much more attention to. But they're doing that against the tide. They're swimming against the tide because, broadly speaking, the world doesn't recognise these things as either fundamentally important or, perhaps more importantly, capable of shaping the future of society. And so, to some extent, in terms of being able to survive and stay the course, you have to sort of have a very strong sense of what you believe is really important, whether or not the world agrees with you or not. I think the other thing is to be careful about your expectations of what will happen. And I think the further and more specific your predictions of how the world might change and what might happen, you're more likely to be less happy, because it's unpredictable, it's chaotic, it's uncertain. As you say, sustainability itself has ebbs and flows. Sometimes the momentum seems to be with us, and sometimes we're very much swimming against the tide. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I think part of it is about setting your expectations sort of appropriately and not projecting them too far out, because
Yes.
it's the further out you get, the less predictable the world gets.
Last time after our conversation, I really took out a message for myself, which is something I try to live by anyways, but it felt like it hit me also professionally. And that is, whatever we do, we don't need to see the results in this lifetime, but it's towards a bigger something which we may or may not ever really perceive. So Anna and me, we have coined the term Sustainia. And that's really this utopian, beautiful vision. And part of the process is to never really reach it, but that doesn't make it frustrating, but actually beautiful and encouraging, because it's really about the process, the action, and not just always thinking in nouns and success and just being that person.
And Shanta, it's very nice how you summed it up as something positive, that it's a good thing to work towards something bigger, because I think that many people in our audience would completely agree with you, Joss, in saying, yes, we're swimming against the tides, and we have to be careful with our expectations to not become unhappy or even burned out. And it's a very real challenge we all face in this profession.
And a fine line to cynicism, because what I'm describing, people could also turn towards cynicism, but it's something around hope, realism, idealism, they're all packed into one.
Absolutely, and I think there is something to be said for sort of necessary cynicism. I think a certain level of cynicism in terms of understanding that the world is not always predictable, that we don't, as people and as a sort of mass, as a species, we're not always the most rational, that logic and facts and data are a piece of the puzzle rather than the whole thing. I think recognising or sort of balancing or tempering a necessary or appropriate level of cynicism with also a level of, we tend to call it sort of I tend to call myself a willful optimist, and that's an optimist that is, knows that it won't all go in the right way, but hopeful that it might. If that makes sense. And just in terms of this sort of vision that you talk about in terms of your expression of FindingSustainia, we talk about an area of our work that we call Towards 9 billion, which is the same sort of thing. And essentially this is saying, we've got visitors coming, should we tidy the house? If we have 9.5 or 10 billion people coming, can we build a world where we could welcome them rather than fear their arrival? And if we were going to build that world, what are the changes that we might make in terms of policy, in terms of priority, in terms of orientation between economics and the planet, and those sorts of aspects? So I think this idea of having a vision, but knowing that vision is, what you're trying to do is work towards contributing towards the achievement of that vision, not necessarily knowing that whole thing will be achieved.
As we told you, we spoke with Michael Brown yesterday. He's the author of I Don't Agree. And there we spoke about the East-West divide and how there are these collectivist cultures and the individualist cultures. And we identified that especially changemakers, we need more connection. Every one of us needs a bit more of both. So collectivist cultures need maybe a little bit more individualism and vice versa. And I feel this hits us as people in the sustainability field the most, because we are going against the stream all the time. And not feeling supported and part of a community can take its extra toll, because a lot of our work is already just doing something against the grain. First of all, would you call yourself rather an individualist or someone who is part of a community? And I mean, you have been building communities for changemakers, something we are also really fond of and also would love to learn a bit more about. Maybe you have some thoughts about what younger change makers could kind of integrate before they have to learn that lesson the hard way, like we did over and over again, and probably you too, I imagine.
Yeah, well, I think that, I mean, there's a number of topics there. I think that essentially, in terms of the sort of individual versus collective, I mean, the reason we talked about and we talk about as our sort of vision, the towards 9 billion, is this idea that essentially we are essentially common occupiers of a single home, and that to some extent considering or needing to consider a collective or common issues and challenges and how we manage those for the common good of humanity and the common good of the planet is a absolutely necessary element. But I think also recognizing that obviously with cultural variations, human beings do also make choices for more specific, more narrow reasons for themselves, for their own survival, for the security and happiness of those around them, their families and their communities. And that essentially we tend to try not be very ideological, but I think there needs to be a balance between recognising humans do make choices in relatively sort of smaller sets and not always taking a global context, but with the idea that if you have a system that has a global impact, i.e. capitalism, or any other global system, you need to think about the collective impacts as well and how the system as a whole operates within the limits of the planet, because at the moment we only have one place to live.
And do you have a specific idea how to practice or train this muscle, seeing the big picture, but not being overwhelmed by it?
I don't know if there's a magic solution. I mean, to some extent, one of the sort of little tools that we use is people thinking about their spheres of concern, control and influence. And I think it is very, as you say, it's very easy to be overwhelmed by the scale and the scope of sustainability challenges, and for those to be so large that it sort of pushes us into inertia or not making decisions or not taking action. So I think having an understanding of the difference between what you're concerned about, what keeps you awake at night, what worries you, but also being able to say, well, that might be a very large sphere and it might be an overwhelming sphere, but within that sphere is what you can influence, and that you can influence through your actions, through your conversations, through your thinking, through your writing, but also you can control, and the control tends to be smaller depending on where you are in an organisation. But I think a reasonably clear understanding of, if you're concerned about a topic, what's your ability to influence it? And that might be small. And what's your ability to control things? And that might be even smaller. But it still allows you to see a place within a bigger picture. Again, it's not a magic bullet, but it's trying to sort of say, how do you think about and how do you reconcile or wrestle with the fact that the world is full of things that are much bigger than any one of us?
I absolutely agree with you. And we are also trained in this kind of systems thinking, analysis. And we have a certain literacy to be able to assess, okay, I may have some influence at least in my purchasing decisions, and maybe not having a subscription with, I don't know, Amazon or something. And then there are also those large scale ones which have more professional implications. But I feel a lot of people take these ideas in a very subjective and emotional way. So some feel, okay, if I just never use a plastic straw again, that's my point of influence. Or others think, okay, whatever I do doesn't matter anyways. And all of these are rather decisions or viewpoints that are only fed by emotions and often lack of literacy. And I'm just wondering, let's say we have a 5-year-old or a 7-year-old in front of us, and how to kind of explain them, how to analyze, of course, within certain bounds, what kind of levers they have, what kind of points of influence, so you don't get overwhelmed or cynical.
So you were asking about, how I think conversations with 4 and 5-year-olds. I mean, my grandson is round at the moment. He's 4, and his mother is extremely good at telling him and talking to him about, what choices that he might make and the consequences of them. I think she's much better at it than I am, but I think that essentially we all need to try and figure out, and I think it changes by individual to individual, and also how you experience life, how you whether you're an immediate responder, whether you're a reflector, and also what situation you're in. I mean, I think certainly for most people at the early stage of their careers in sustainability, they are unlikely to have a huge amount of power and influence.
In terms of uncertainty, you had put different parameters. So it helps us to have more literacy around uncertainty, and people can work with that. And that's actually also what we try to do. None of those factors are ever perfect, but the more factors you bear in mind, let's take something as health. So one person will tell you, I do sports to keep healthy. And that's true. But if that person only eats junk food, then that's not great either. And what is healthy food? The more you know, you have your 5 portions of veg and so on. So the more literacy you have. And I feel we need these kinds of frameworks are also around our points of influence. And maybe you have a few factors in your mind, simple factors, because that's what these kind of models tend to do anyway, to simplify certain things. But still, it's quite helpful to have a few factors that help us to see where we have a real lever and a real point of influence. And that applies to a 5-year-old just as much as us who are just about 20 plus.
My 20s look like a long time ago looking back. Yeah, I think it's a difficult question because it so much relates to particular and specific individual contexts. But I think context is really important. I think certainly early on in my career, and for people that are at the start of their sustainability careers, they will always have a tension between the huge ambitions that they would have for affecting a change in the world and the specific opportunities that they have in either their position, whether they're in their job or their mission in life. And there's always going to be a tension and a difference between those. I think it's about finding how can you, if you have a reasonably clear idea, just like we spoke earlier about, your vision for FindingSustainia, our vision that we call towards 9 billion. What are the ways, even if they're tiny, that you are being true to your goals or your longer term endeavour about what changes you want to see in the world? Are you making small contributions towards that in the context of maybe if you're a practitioner in a company? Are there ways that the company is more able, more capable of dealing with, of understanding, of responding to sustainability than it would have been if you weren't there? And those things might be very small. It might be that you have an ability to influence the people around you in terms of building their understanding, in terms of connecting sustainability topics with their priorities, their success. But I think any long journey, I mean, this is a cliche, but any long journey has small steps in it. And it's understanding whether those steps are towards the end point or the destination that you want, or whether they are going off in the wrong direction. I don't think there is one answer here at all, I must say.
It's actually really interesting because again leads back to the we. Because if most of us, if that's actually what we deem as successful in our society, is kind of contributing to a better society instead of just contributing to making ourselves better. This is why we speak about a better we for a better world. We're kind of getting further there, and that starts in education. So for Anna and us, we have these different subjects. One is really education and starting with young people, then bringing together change makers, which is also something you do. And actually it would also really interest me, I'm seeing Anna also has a point to raise, or a question, that how do you feel? What are the different ways where you feel you are? So we talk about being a change agent, so an agent where you also feel kind of empowered and capable of contributing in smaller and bigger ways.
Maybe I can add just my thought from the book I was just reading. It's actually a very well-known podcast, Diaries of a CEO, from Stephen Bartlett. And there he said that you have 5 buckets which you need to fill to increase your influence. And he said that you have to fill them in the right order. And I slightly disagree with him. And maybe, Joss, you can then answer Shanta's and my question together. He said that these 5 buckets, first is you need to acquire knowledge, then you need to develop skills, then you need to enlarge or design your network, and raise resources. And the 5th one is your reputation. And he said it's so important to first concentrate on the knowledge, then on the skills, and not start with the reputation or start with the network. But I have the feeling that even when you are young, it's very important to have this network in mind and not do it, okay, first the knowledge, then the skills, and then I can think of a network. I think that this network, the value of a network is very important from the very beginning. What do you think, Joss?
I think rarely in life do we do things in the most logical sequential orders. Life in practice tends to be more chaotic, and you can sort of figure out that you've perhaps made progress 2 steps forward in one thing and 1 step back in another. I mean, I do think that having obviously this really varies depending on your situation, but I think having a clear sense of what the expertise, what the knowledge, what pieces that you bring to a puzzle is quite critical. I mean, particularly if we're thinking about practitioners within organisations, sustainability or ESG or sustainability practitioners, they're frequently, depending on the circumstances, required to be a knowledge centre, knowledge holders for particular topics that perhaps the organisation as a whole doesn't have expertise in. So I think having an element of secure knowledge and some expertise in the topic is really important, particularly in those circumstances. The utility of that knowledge is obviously going to be maximised by the networks that you have, your ability to utilise those networks to either spread that knowledge, build that knowledge in other people, or utilise that knowledge in order to seek to influence. I think to some extent they both fundamental requirements, that you can know everything about everything, but if you don't know anyone, then you can't spread that knowledge or test that knowledge to see whether it's actually meaningful or functional knowledge. So I think to some extent those 2 elements go hand in hand. But what we do find, and I think your work obviously echoes, is that we know that a lot of sustainability people in organisations or in society are by their nature quite isolated. They might be the only ones in their organisations. They might be, again, as we talked earlier, swimming against the tide in their institutions or of society in general. And so obviously building networks of common interest and common focus is a really critical element to maintaining your passion and feeling like you are able to achieve something, or you can achieve something through your relationships.
And maybe you can tell us a little bit about the WWF group.
The Sustainability Action Network. A network, this is very old now. So I think we set it up when I was at WWF in 1999. But it was recognising, just as you've recognised, that, and is still the case now, that many sustainability people isolated in their organisations, they might be having to pursue an agenda that is at odds with the organization's priorities or the organization's culture, but between organizations, they share challenges. So they share challenges from, if you're a sustainability professional in one firm, then you might very much have the same challenges as a sustainability professional in another firm. And we recognized that there was an opportunity to do what we called sort of pre-commercial collaboration, that they wouldn't necessarily want to share details of their firm's secrets, if you like, but they would share challenges that were common to sustainability practitioners. And that's something that we ran for about 4 or 5 years in the late 90s and early noughties. And it's something that we've actually done in my firm, Terrafinity. We have a little group called the Sustainability Professionals Resilience Group, which does very similar thing that we set up at the start of lockdown as a way of keeping sustainability professionals in touch at a time when they were even more isolated than normal. So I think this idea of bringing professionals together, sometimes it really helps to know that someone else has the same challenges that you do, and it's not just your problem. It's not a fault of yours that it's difficult to pursue sustainability in your organization.
And it's not just about the problems, it's also about sharing perspectives, having someone from another field but with a common interest or some kind of other perspective coming into that subject. It actually opens new horizons for you. So there's that serendipity, almost chance aspect of also, I feel, of complementing knowledge. A lot of the things that we do, as much as we'd like to say it was all strategic, it also came from a serendipity aspect where I took a science of well-being course and started to learn about mental well-being because it started to affect me, the kind of work we were sometimes doing. And then I saw an intersection, and then we saw, oh, a lot of other people seem to be affected. It's not just us. And that's how we basically stumbled upon something which is really the backbone of FindingSustainia now. Only happens through that serendipity factor.
And it's very nice to hear from you, Joss, that you pretty much identified the same challenges and some of the same solutions 25 years ago, because with FindingSustainia, we came up with exactly that. We said, oh, that's needed. The world needs us. And probably there are so many sustainability professionals or change agents who have not ever even heard about groups where people gather to create a bigger picture, to strive together and so on. So it's interesting across the countries, across time, across organizations to have this awakening moment and then real formats to support.
Absolutely. I mean, I think how we saw sustainability at the time in the late 90s, and I think you can still very much see it like this now, which is that the journey is yet to be articulated. And I think it's not like, and particularly if you think about sustainability as a profession, then it's very much still in its formative stages, that essentially we're talking about to varying degrees articulated idea about what we might want the future to be like, but we don't know every step towards that. So to some extent you have to sort of collaborate, you have to share, you have to figure out what steps might be useful. You need to learn how other people have achieved what they've achieved. And very often, finding out from people what didn't work is just as useful as finding out what did work. Success stories are great, but they can be quite alienating to some extent. Knowing, well, I tried this and it was a disaster is just as useful as, I tried this and it was a roaring success. So I think to some extent humanizing the challenges, showing that we might be working on our own, but we're working as part of a greater whole towards something greater, and knowing to some extent what challenges, what missteps people have made, what mistakes they've made, and how they dealt with those and how they overcame them is fantastically useful.
I still notice, even though we have the internet now and are hyper connected, is that a lot of us, in good faith, reinvent the wheel over and over again. So I'm part of a climate fund, and I do receive a lot of personal emails where someone is telling me a wonderful invention. I just know that it already exists in 3 different forms. Also, a lot of the efforts that Anna and me did, if we had met you earlier, we could have rather joined forces and make this even better in terms of mental health for sustainability professionals. And it's I feel it's a real challenge because a lot of us have great minds, but if we brought them together in a streamlined effort, it doesn't need to be, we don't even have to think that internationally because that may be hard or not, but where we can develop best practices and put ourselves there. So that actually again touches upon that individualist and collectivist thing, because I've also told some people, okay, how about you work on this together? But there tends to be some resistance, especially in Western change makers. At least that's my impression. And I'd love to hear what you think about that, or whether you've observed the same issue.
I think you're absolutely right about, I think anyone that is involved in sustainability for a while and thinks about the nature of their endeavour will probably come. I mean, there's a concept in evolution called parallel evolution, where you see the same sorts of forms filling niches in ecological contexts that are sort of the logical expression of an opportunity, if you like. So to some extent, and the same thing goes with regard to thinking. I think if people are practitioners in an area or engaged in an area or develop interests and expertise, and they have an element of reflection in terms of how they think about, how successful am I, what am I doing wrong, all of these, how might I do better. I think to some extent a lot of people come towards some of the same sorts of conclusions. So I do think there are many people around the world that are engaged in this endeavour that recognise, similar common challenges, similar common opportunities. I think that challenges that we have in collaboration, tend to be because people have different personal situations and the scope that they might have to. So for us, we're a consulting firm. So whilst what we try and do is do collaboration, we also need at some point to figure out, are we also being paid to do some work? And can I afford the mortgage and those sorts of things? So I think it's always a balance. I've been lucky enough in a couple of jobs to actually have a brand to work for, WWF for 5 years and the World Business Council for Sustainable Development for 3 years, where I had a good brand to work for, so I could get connections with people and we could get engagement and collaboration. I had resources. I had a relatively good opportunity to plan and execute my own work, so I had a really good management. But those are quite unique situations. Quite often we are thinking about, certainly as a consultant, you're thinking, where's the next job coming from and what do I need to do in order to get that job? So I think collaboration is more or less difficult depending on individual circumstances and whether you have financial security to be able to do that, or whether you're actually going, I can't collaborate because I need to secure my own interest and get this next contract in and deliver this next contract, etc. So I think it's a real challenge and will really vary.
What we believe with FindingSustainia is that we definitely need different formats. We need to have low-cost formats where it's very easy to meet for little amount of time for some people, and then for others it's very important to meet in person, to have this very intimate contact and have more time. So this is definitely something we're elaborating on, which formats are best. And for all of you, dear listeners, we're always interested also in feedback. What would help you in shaping change? Which formats would you like to see? We have a few, but it's always good to receive some feedback on what is possible and really helpful in your specific situation.
You mentioned something really important about it. It's context dependent. For instance, in science, And also in certain product development, I really believe it would make sense to collaborate more. But then, of course, if it's your product, you can make more money off it. So there's always that aspect as well. So that makes it a little tricky.
You're absolutely right. I mean, again, I used this term in relation to a project that you mentioned, that we did at WWF many years ago called the Sustainability Action Network. But it's also how the WBCSD organise themselves. They talk about pre-commercial collaboration. So where are the areas where there is an opportunity to collaborate, where there is a distinction between specific opportunities that might be undertaken and deployed by an individual company versus a common challenge that company and other companies either in the sector or in general share. And it's sort of understanding where there is a distinction between exploring, navigating, prioritising what the dimensions of the common challenge are versus how that knowledge is then used or deployed by a specific institution that might serve their commercial interests. So I think it's sort of understanding where the threshold is between the exploration of a common challenge and the application or implications of that for individual institutions or entities. Does that make sense, or is it too abstract?
For some contexts, that's probably exactly it. For others, there is, I'm now thinking of some difficulties people have in reporting challenges or following regulations. Then there is not a phase of pre-commercial and so on. So there it can be an ongoing joint learning experience. And what I really like is that you also come from this, or that touched the topic of accounting, disclosure in the sustainability field, because this is something many of us are getting a headache from. And in the beginning of the podcast, we talked about uncertainty, and I just want to add one thought, because I do not want it to be seen that sustainability is a topic of uncertainty, because there are so many facts in sustainability. And in the beginning, Joss, you said it's important to see the facts, but see them as part of the picture, and not that the facts are all important, but then there's uncertainty next to the facts, and then there's a human factor and so on. So I'm curious to learn, how do we explain to the public that the perceived certainty of financial aspects take a bigger room in this picture? There are different facts and different elements to that picture, and that the financial is only a part of it. This was the question I always had from the beginning, which was not yet covered.
It's probably the subject of another hour-long conversation, but I think essentially what you're speaking to there is this challenge that we have, the fundamental challenge in sustainability, which is that we seeking to describe the world in ways that is not necessarily recognised, rewarded, or priced or prioritised by the systems that we work within. Specifically, I'm talking about how economics understands and describes the world, and how then accounting processes work within that economic system to tell us what's meaningful information or not. And I think fundamentally all of the dissonance and the challenges that we have in sustainability is that what we're saying is that the quality, quantity, diversity and extent of natural life on the planet, and the quality and quantity of human life on the planet is more fundamentally important than economics and accounting actually recognises. And how we start to bring those topics, those issues and those values into economics, accounting, decision making, such that we have a different set of global outcomes. And those things are really big topics. This is why I said we might need another hour on them, because I think essentially what we're trying to do is get systems to recognise the value of acting in a way that is cognizant of and responsive to the physical reality of the natural world. And that is something that economics and accounting has struggled with for 100 odd years, didn't think that it needed to bother with. And this is really the challenge that we're dealing with.
I'm just extremely happy that we know you now. I mean, it's not the end of Finding Sustainia, as Shanta said. Sustainia is an ongoing project, and we can definitely think of another format of diving deeper into this topic. But it's great you are such an expert on that.
We should co-organize a kind of session sometime soon. I'd really like this kind of an exchange and maybe learning from each other on that. That would give me a lot of pleasure.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we would love to see this conversation. I would love to see this conversation as the start of something rather than, you know, the end. I think there are so many topics when we're talking about sustainability. We're talking about trying to change how the world works. It's not the subject, you know, you can't cover all of the topics that are required within half an hour or three-quarters of an hour or an hour, or even perhaps more than that. And I think we've, you know, in terms of the conversation that we've had, we've moved from, you know, how does an individual seek to understand their role, their opportunities, how they seek to make change. We've talked about the sort of clarity of what, you know, do we have a shared vision, even if it's in our heads and not written down, about how the world might be and how we contribute towards that. But we've also touched upon, you know, the challenges that we have in terms of the systems of priority, production, value, etc., and how those need to change. So absolutely.
You know, while you were talking, I had that idea of asking you that final question. That is, if the Sustainia fairy came to you and said, okay, just paint me that vision of Sustainia 2050, what would that look and feel like for you? Because we need these kinds of visions that give us momentum and motivation. And what would this version of Sustainia be for you, Joss?
We tend to talk about, I mean, and I've mentioned a couple of times, we tend to call it towards 9 billion, and it's this idea of building a world where we could welcome 9 to 10 billion people rather than fear their arrival. And how we think about that is 9 to 10 billion capable citizens. And what we mean by capable citizens are those people who are able to deliver security for themselves and their family, to spend their time doing something useful, however you express that, and to do that within a system that is reflective of and responsive to resource limits, that is cognizant of how science tells us the world works, that is based upon systems which are rejuvenative and rather than extractive, which understands that there are resources that need maintaining and managing, that have a stewardship orientation rather than an extractive one, rather than a take, make, waste model. So essentially, people who are capable of making choices for themselves and their families, where those choices are not innately likely to undermine the choices of themselves in the future or people who are as yet unborn. And we talk, you know, in sustainable development, as you know, talk about forthcoming generations. So that's the sort of thing, the idea of people being able to make choices that are more innately likely to add to the resilience, health, vitality and diversity of the planet that we all operate within.
Wow. There is nothing I can add to that. And it seems that someone else asked you already a similar question. Or, as you said, you were reflecting on this future before, because this was already very nicely.
We've sort of written quite a lot about this to try and say, what is this vision and how might it be expressed? And if anyone's interested, they can come and look at Terrafinity's website and look for towards 9 billion, and they'll find all sorts of explorations of this idea and some of the sort of shorter term challenges and the longer term vision.
We'll link them in the show notes. And I think we could dedicate a podcast to also how to get to these visions, because that's also something Anna and me have written plentiful about kind of how to get. We have a certain process around kind of imagining that future, what different stumbling blocks could be there, what our values are around that, what is important to us, and how we get there. And yeah, I think there's room for more. And I'm really looking forward to that. Maybe you could tell us how our listeners and viewers could find you and connect to your work, connect with you.
That would be a pleasure. So if you go to www.terrafinity.com, which is TERRAFINITI.com, just search for Joss Tantram on the internet. You should find me. On Terrafinity, we have a whole range of information. Some of it is selling our services, but some of it is the bigger picture stuff which sits under articles. So, or if you search for Joss Tantram and towards 9 billion, you will find a whole range of writing, some of it constructive, some of it pessimistic, most of it, more of it, hopefully, optimistic about how the world might be different for ourselves and our families.
I like that you said you are a willful optimist. So we stay with this.
I think anyone that's in this world in sustainability has to be a willful optimist. Otherwise, we'd have given up and gone home and done something, baked bread, or done something much more immediately practical.
So thank you so much, Joss, for taking the time and just having a chat with us. And I'm looking forward to further chat on vision, how to strengthen sustainability people, how to strengthen the subject, and also how to stay fun and light in the process, or as light as possible, as willfully optimist as possible.
That's my absolute pleasure. I think trying to have fun, keeping a sense of humour, understanding what we can do and can't do. But it's been an absolute pleasure to have the opportunity and an honour to talk to you. And I would love to see if we can collaborate further in the future, to talk more in the future, and very much look forward to doing so.
Thank you so much.